Great. So like I said, thank you so much for joining the Black Metropolis Research Consortium for our second Archives Awareness panel. My name is T. Calvin. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Community Engagement Archivist for the BMRC. Just a quick image description of myself. I'm a light-skinned brown person with curly short hair that's fading from a kind of pink. I have a dark colored striped shirt on, and there's a yellow wall with a white door behind me. But that's about me. I want to also talk a little bit about what the BMRC is and the work that we do. We are a Chicago-based membership association of libraries, universities, museums, community arts and government organizations, and other archival institutions. Our mission is to connect everyone seeking to document, share, understand, and preserve Black experiences, and it is our vision to be essential to promoting the discovery, preservation, and use of Black historical collections. We run two main programs. The first is the Archie Motley Internship Program, which allows students and recent graduates to get paid hands-on experience in archives with materials directly. And the second is a summer short-term fellowship program that provides opportunities for researchers and artists and scholars to come access collections at our member institutions, research them, and do projects with them. Also, we have a newly revamped archives portal with Black historical collections information from institutions all around Chicago, and you can find that on our website. And we also have a resources page on our website that includes our legacy management resource portal with information about personal, family, and organizational archiving and how to make donations to repositories. And there's a workshops page with information and recordings of previous programmings we've done about personal, family, organizational archiving, donating, and even finding ways or opportunities to fund organizational archiving projects. So that's the work that we do, but today is not about the BMRC. Today is about our wonderful panelists, and we're going to hear from them more about the work that they do, what memory work means to them, and why legacy management is important specifically for Black communities. I don't want to take up any more time, so I'm going to go ahead and get started introducing our first speaker, who's Stacy Williams. I'm very proud and excited to have Stacy speak today. Stacy is the inaugural division chief for archives and special collections at the Chicago Public Library. She has managed digital scholarship programs at the University of Chicago Library and Case Western Reserve University, and is a member of the independent Blackivist Collective, which works to preserve Chicago area Black history. She has worked previously at Harvard University, the University of Kentucky, and the Lexington Public Library. Williams is currently serving a 3-year term as publications editor and chair for the Society of American Archivists Publications Board, which publishes books, case studies, and other works related to the archival profession. She has served on the advisory board for the Digital Library Federation, program chair of the SAA-ARL Mosaic Scholarship Program, which provided scholarships to LIS and archives graduate students of color for nearly 10 years. And Stacy was also appointed to the Library of Congress's Digital Strategy Working Group by Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden. Williams is also a former journalist and writer whose work has appeared in the Chicago Review of Books, The Nation, Bitch, Lit Hub, New York Magazine, Catapult, Gordon Square Review, and The Rumpus. Her bibliomemoir on gentrification and race, Bizarro World, was published in 2018. And she's additionally the co-author of a chapter on epistemic supremacy with fellow Simmons graduate Myrna Morales, published in Knowledge Justice, Disrupting Library and Information Science Through Critical Race Theory. Williams was an American Library Association Spectrum Scholar and has a BA in journalism from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, as well as an MS in Library and Information Science with a concentration in archives and archival management. That's a great introduction to only get started on all the work that Stacy has done. And I'll pass it off to you. And I said this a little bit before you hopped on the call, but I can either read the questions out to you, or if you have something prepared, you can share your screen, or feel free to go ahead.
You know, questions are fine. This is actually presentation number 3 today. So let's have a conversation. I would love to.
That's great. Sounds good. Yeah. So the first question is just, we went over here sort of your titles and the official formal things that you have done that are on paper, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what the archiving work you do consists of, and sort of explaining, as we're talking about archives awareness, a little bit about what you do as an archivist.
Excuse me. Okay. Yes, great question. All great questions. So I'm working at Chicago Public Library now. And my title is Division Chief, but I realize that's not like a descriptive title. It is a new title. There are, of the 81 branches that are at CPL, 3 of those locations have archival repositories in them. There's stacks, there's collections, like there are all types of things that all come with their own considerations. And then there's also a system-wide exhibits department, which we would like to pivot to be kind of an arm that helps us activate what's in some of our collections, but also help local partners activate their collections on site. So that's really kind of the overview. I say that, but it's a new position in that these archival units were always there. And within the past couple of years, CPL, like a lot of other large public libraries that have archival collections, decided to pull their units together so that they could more strategically focus on things like digitization and external resource development, et cetera. So that's like the day-to-day. Oh, and I guess in terms of where physically I work, I am at my office is at the Harold Washington main branch, which is in downtown Chicago, but the sites themselves are across the city. So there's the Northside Neighborhood History Collection that's at the city's Sulzer Regional Library on the northwest side. Special Collections and Preservation, which is also here downtown, as is the Exhibits Department, and the Vivian Research Collection for Afro-American History and Literature, that's at the city's Woodson Regional Library on the south side. So yeah, thinking it's the organization and coordination of those units, trying to come up with standardized practices. Like all 3 units had very different practices for like how they might have been processing or how they might have responded like to staffing issues or challenges, had very different like funding streams, even very different budgets. So bringing all of that together in a way that's like, I say trying to, because it takes a lot, there's a lot of moving pieces that would create that situation, but trying to create conditions that are equitable for essentially the labor of archival work. Also want to keep it short because yeah, 10-15 minutes. I don't want to take everyone's time. So that's that is the work that I do as an archivist at this point. It has been a long time since I've like just straight up processed a collection and sat there with the boxes in the whole nine. Maybe it's been several years since I either processed a collection or digitized a collection. But I think it's really important. There were a lot of tasks I did that were at that very entry level where I had the opportunity to understand, like, oh, okay, here's what it is like to process a collection. Here's what it's like to work in a reference room and like help people find the information. Here's what it's like to then further take this and create an actual event out of it, or create some type of program. Like in my case, it was internship projects, but people will create programs, people will create grants, figuring out all the little roles that essentially help make the trains run. I'd say this is my title now, but I've been really fortunate that over the course of my archives career, I had opportunities to do that like little piece work, so that now from this perch, I have, I think what is a decent like real world experience that allows me to think through whatever decisions I'm planning.
Yeah, I appreciate you explaining all of that and also sort of going back a little bit to the background of what other archivists might do in different positions besides yours. The second question is a bit broader scope because I think a lot more folks, even outside of the field, are hearing the term memory work more and more often. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what memory work means to you and how it might be related to archiving specifically.
I think memory work is interesting because it is that more, it's subjective, but it's also more personal in a way. And I think it is largely referring to, we know what archiving is. We know what the verb is supposed to describe, and the act of, describing, arranging, making accessible collections. Memory work to me suggests me more just intimate engagement with like the subject or creator, because it is their memory, and we know that memory, the lenses that it comes through, it's subjective, it's personal, it's like full of whatever context you bring with you. So I think really to me, it's just describing this process by which we're trying to create space to bring people to the table who were not at the table before, to share what they know of their history so that it can be documented in the same way. Maybe that's real pat. I think this is a question I feel like I get a lot, and it does mean, I think, different things to different people. So that's how I guess made it, that's how it makes sense to me, or that's how I interpret it when people have asked what do they think that looks like.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer. And we definitely, in the last panel at least, had three different but obviously interconnected answers that overlapped in their own ways. So that's great. And the last question is also related, but talks a little bit broader out to communities and why legacy management is important specifically for Black communities.
Again, another really great question. And I'll say, perhaps at this point, it's a conversation that we've had more of, or that I feel like I'm having more with all kinds of donors. The changes in technology toward the end of the 20th century so deeply impacted, I think, what archivists in the middle of the 20th century thought they understood about collecting and like what could be available, and also copyright and rights management. So I think this idea of just legacy management in general, just having that conversation with folks to start them thinking, okay, if you have these materials and you're saying that well, actually, let me pull back. Really, it's more about starting that conversation and say, what's your expectation? What is your full expectation down the line? Everybody has expectations, I think, about this warfare. They come to it with what they would like to see happen once they have, prepared a collection and handed it off to an institution. There's always in their mind a thing or a series of things or a mode of engagement that they would like to see after that happens. And so I think being transparent, number one, but also helping people to understand what that full spate of legacy management means. It's not just that you handed off your materials to an institution, but like, for instance, if it's a creative work, really opening up that conversation around the long-term rights management, this idea of, okay, you pass, as we all do, as far as I know, there's no zombies on this call, as far as I had heard, but like, if we all pass and you have not made plans with either your descendants or some other entity to manage those things once you are gone, absolutely, that's how things fall into obscurity. They fall into loss, or they could, then they're just kind of hiding in plain sight. If an institution that you left your materials with does not have the ability to make that accessible in any way, shape, or form, yeah, no one will know what was so special about what you wanted to, document, what you wanted to be a part of history, because yeah, I think it's just about that conversation and making folks aware that, hey, this is actually what goes on behind the scenes. It looks like this out front. It looks like out front, here is a website and a link I can click to see my collection. But on the back end, it's, do the staff here have the ability to make reproductions of this work for research? Do they have the ability to make it available for researchers who are going to come in? Are there notes around redaction? Are there sensitive materials in there that actually mean the collection maybe isn't appropriate in the place that they wanted to put it? So I think just having that conversation, like the idea of legacy, this is your legacy, this is the thing you're leaving behind and you want it to last. Having those more honest conversations with folks about what that means, especially from an access perspective. People have expectations that they will, just be able to drop their stuff in an archive, and the archive itself will automatically have the resources and staffing to turn it around and make it a thing. So now we're just at a point, I think, where we have the opportunity to have more, I think maybe just more transparent conversations where we're lifting up the hood and saying, here's what it actually is, as opposed to, taking the collection at the point that you sign the deed of gift, the donor goes their way and you go yours, and there isn't that communication around the expectation.
Yeah, thank you for saying all of that. That was really thorough, and I think paints a really good picture of a lot of different perspectives of what ends up happening with people's materials while they're still alive and also after they pass. So thank you. Thank you so much, Stacie, for answering those questions. I'm going to move along and introduce our next speaker, trying to make sure we have enough time at the end for questions. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Raquel Flores-Clemons, who is the head of the Vivian G. Harsh Research Collection, a unit of the Archives and Special Collections Division of Chicago Public Library. The Harsh Research Collection is the largest African-American history and literature collection in the Midwest. In this role, she also serves as vice chairperson for the Black Metropolis Research Consortium, an association of libraries, universities, museums, community arts, government organizations, and other archival institutions that connects and provides broad access to its members' holdings and materials that document African-American and African diasporic culture, history, and politics, with a focus on materials relating to Chicago. An advocate for equity and access, Raquel maintains a deep commitment to capturing historical narratives of communities of color and engages hip hop as a method of archival praxis. Raquel is passionate about connecting community members and organizers to valuable primary resources and intentional in ensuring that historical gaps are filled by documenting and amplifying the often underrepresented historical narratives and contributions of BIPOC communities to better support efforts to create a more equitable society. Raquel received her Master of Library and Information Science with Special Collections certification from the iSchool at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She also has studied at Howard University and received her Bachelor in Liberal Arts and Sciences from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Raquel uses she, her, hers pronouns. And Raquel, I said this before, but I will repeat it just for convenience. If you have something prepared, you can go ahead and share it, or I can read the questions off to you as I did with Stacie.
This is a conversation, so go ahead.
Great.
And
we'll stick to it throughout. Sounds good. Yeah, so the first question is just about if you can explain a little bit more of what you do as an archivist in your current role. And maybe if you can, in a few words, like Stacie did, talk about some previous work and what that actually entailed.
Sure. So I am currently the head of the Vivian Harsh Research Collection, and in this role, I steward a massive collection of documentation, literature, and manuscripts related to Chicago history, particularly the Black experience in Chicago. We are the largest collection of its kind, as you stated, and a part of that role in stewarding is also making sure that not only is it accessible to the public, that it's taken care of well, but also that it is engaged with. And so activation is also part of that work. And a lot of the work that I think that when people may think of archives, I think of the work that we do, if they are somewhat familiar with it, is I think the part of activation is key. And that's what really allows people to engage with it in a more practical way. We know archives provides the means and resources for people to do their, to do research and produce various modes of engagement, scholarly, work particularly, but, oftentimes, that work of activation really is through public programming and making sure that we are, pulling down this this pie in the sky mentality of archives and scholarly work and bringing it to the community. And for me, that in terms of thinking about memory work, I really do like the term memory work, because what we do as archivists, what I do as an archivist, is only one aspect of that work. Memory work really does involve the entire community. And I often say that, we are co-pilots to the community. Our institutions, hold the memories of community members. And so it's important for me to always bear that in mind when I'm doing this work, that I am doing this work. And particularly for me, I've always had an interest in making sure that communities of color, and particularly the Black experience, is documented and amplified. And so for me, I know that I am coming alongside of community members who are doing the work in the community, that have, whatever cultural production that comes from their work, and we are, stewards of taking care of it and making sure that it is that it exists in, in perpetuity, longevity. And so that's what I think that was kind of a mashup of what I do here at the Harsh, but kind of just this broader view of thinking about my work as an archivist.
Yeah.
And feel free to repeat the question if I missed a point.
No, that was perfect. And that's a really good segue into the next question, because you started talking about a little bit of what memory work means to you specifically and how it's related to archiving as a part of it, like you said.
Yeah. So, again, for me, it means to make sure that that the narratives and histories of, individuals that make a community are preserved and told, and knowing that I am offering an aspect of that. Yes, I have the training and the skill set to collect and, and to organize and provide access to historical materials in various ways. But that is, again, a part of the larger frame of memory work, because to be honest with you, and I often say this, you sometimes don't know what you don't know. And one thing that I've learned a lot in doing this work is that, and not to diminish what we do, but a lot of what we do, when you start to, before you get into the nuts and bolts, the nuts and bolts of the technical aspects of our work, we are innately archival human beings. Like, we hold our memories. There are things that we deem important to us that we keep some type of aspect of, whether it's through a photograph, through, writing it down, through journaling, that sort of thing. So we as human beings are innately archival. And a lot of, so just, we folks like to keep, we like to keep things. And so what I've learned is that certain practices and skills that I developed, I was already kind of in that vein in my own life, through, with my own family, I know for me, I've always met people in their families. There's that one person that knows all the stories, that knows all the history of the family. They could tell you, and they may even be able to tell you about things of that family history that also connects to the larger community, and that can share a different vantage point of, ongoings of a particular neighborhood, and that sort of thing. And so memory work is more inclusive. It doesn't just, hold, that title of like, we are the archivists and like we're the only ones that can do the work. There are people in the community that are already kind of doing something like that. So we, again, come alongside them and say, we have these resources that we can help you streamline them more, to make sure that if it's not preserved or being taken care of in a proper environment, okay, we can help and support that, whether it's coming alongside you, and providing just those resources and information, or at some point you decide to deposit your materials into an organization. So that's what memory work means to me. It's understanding that it's everybody's job to keep the memory, because we're doing it already. It includes everyone. And then in my role as an archivist, I can activate the resources I have as part of my institution, and the resources that I've learned and that I have to help community members better preserve their history and in their work.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing up community because that is what the last question is about, and thinking sort of related to archiving and memory work, legacy management, and the importance it holds for Black communities. So if you could just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. You know, and I don't want to butcher the quote, but I'll paraphrase. Hakeem Adabuti have often said, and has, you know, said that if you don't name yourself, somebody else will, you know, and we know that victory, you know, I mean, that history is written by the victor, right? So thinking about these terms for Black people is very important, that we name ourselves, that we claim our space, and that we, you know, put our language and content to how we describe and share and elevate our stories. And so it's, you know, it's critical that, you know, for Black people, and I say Black people very intentionally because, you know, African Americans are Black, but not all Black folks are African American. So it's very important that as Black people that we, you know, that we document ourselves, that we, you know, that we preserve our history, because oftentimes, you know, what our history and histories of communities of color, when we think about the landscape of this country, and when you think about different archival repositories and museums and such, when things are brought into these spaces, they are, you know, it's like they're deemed important. But for me, it's your materials or your photographs or your narrative doesn't have to be in this repository, or doesn't have to be in anyone's repository to be deemed important. And so it's critical that our histories are documented and told, and then for organizations that have the resources to help, you know, to help better preserve that history, for those connections to be made, so that those histories are, again, you know, preserved long term, because the histories of Black people are told through often are told through the vantage point. Until the most recent decades, they were often told through the vantage points of somebody else's, of another's lens, through this white, you know, supremacist critical gaze. And so oftentimes too, that's where we get stereotypes and get, you know, inaccurate information about the things that are happening in our lives and in our communities. And so it's important that we tell our story, and through the memories and narratives that we collect and preserve through the various modes that is done, whether it's, you know, journals, documentation, photographs, manuscripts, however, and even now, even thinking about, you know, digital objects, you know, it's critically important to me that you know, those histories are told. And also too, and not just for Black people, but for all communities of color. It's important that we tell our stories, because we are still kind of, you know, coming against, you know, inaccurate and negative, you know, narratives that have been told about our community. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, no, all three of those answers were wonderful, and I think definitely are really in a good conversation and thorough, meaningful conversation with what Stacie was saying. And I'm excited to move forward with our next panelist. So thank you very much, Raquel, for your answers. I'm sure folks are building up questions. And before I introduce Kellee, I just want to say, if you have any questions already, you can feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll read them once we've wrapped up with Kellee, or when we transition to Q&A, you can raise your hand and I can call on you. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Kellee Warren, who is the Assistant Professor and Special Collections Librarian at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Ms. Warren's most recent article, John Blackwell Hudson, Black Women's Leadership in Librarianship and Archives, a biographical analysis, was published in the May 2022 special issue of Libraries, Culture, History, and Society. Her article on an approach to archival instruction with colonial collections, Reimagining Special Collections Instruction, a Special Case of Haiti, was published in the American Archivist Fall/Winter 2020 edition. An Excessive Workload in Special Collections Public Services Librarianship, Challenges, Feelings, and Impact, a survey of special collections librarians and public services, was published in the Journal of Library Administration. Ms. Warren's research interests include critical pedagogies, digital humanities, and oral history. I'm excited to hear from you, Kellee, and I'll go ahead and repeat the first question, which is basically just whether you can talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing in your current role, and like I said, with Raquel and Stacie, maybe a little bit about the previous work that you've done before getting here.
Okay, so usually, good afternoon, everyone. Usually I sort of start from the beginning and then, sort of a chronological approach to my experience. So uh, basically, I started out training with the idea that I would be in archives and special collections. I really didn't know what that was going to look like. Um, I did gain experience in processing collections. One of my first positions was with an organization called the Chicago Community Trust. So I spent about a year with them as an archives and records intern, and then I ended up at the BMRC as one of their Archie Motley interns, processing a collection that was housed at Chicago State University. So with that interest in special collections and archives, you just, like I said, you never know what you're going to ultimately end up doing. So my current role really isn't in archival processing, even though I'm in the special collections library. But I have my hands pretty much, I manage public services for our daily library location. So we have two locations. We have a special collections location at the Library of the Health Sciences, which mainly focuses on the medical history of the university and also parts of Chicago, the Chicago area. And then the library that I work out of, Daily Library, we mainly focus on the humanities and broadly, the history of Chicago is our collecting focus with some distinctive collections. So getting back to this idea of, if there are any attendees who are really sort of training in special collections, rare books, and archives, you just don't know what you're going to end up doing. So I did not necessarily expect to be managing public services, which is reference instruction, in some aspects of outreach, but here I am doing just that. And also have had the opportunity in the fall coming up, I will be teaching my first credit-bearing course, which of course focuses on special collections, but with topics in the Black diaspora. So yeah, I'm very excited and nervous about that, but there are many different opportunities when you work in an academic setting. It's quite different in that because the first part of my title is assistant professor, that means that my main responsibility is scholarship. So I have to publish or perish, so to speak. So I do, I am an academic. I do research and scholarship in special collections, library and information science, and rare books. And my job that I don't necessarily get paid for is the librarianship component of the job. Let me see, am I getting to the point? No, I'm not, because I prepared slides too. So I'm going to show my screen. I talked to you earlier and told you that, my presentation will sort of be more to the point. I like more questions. I like more interaction with attendees. So, okay, so some background. Like the other panelists, I received my MList from University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. I focused my program on reference and instruction, special collections and rare books, technology in library and information science, and digital preservation. My archival training, as I mentioned earlier, Chicago Community Trust, so that focused on documents, ephemera, photographs, metadata, and creation for a large digital photograph collection. And then, of course, my work with the BMRC at Chicago State. Okay, so your question about what is memory work, sort of in my own words, I don't really get to think about memory work that much, so I had to turn to the literature. So, what I thought about in combination with the literature is that memory involves various types of sources. So that could be print, material, which is photographs and oral, AV sources, the built environment, and also, as Raquel referred to, the body, the physical body. You know, there are many interpretations, definitions of memory work in the literature. So let's begin with the idea that archival collective memory is socially constructed and involves certain agreements. So collective memory is more like a kaleidoscope, in my opinion, more like a kaleidoscope or the cosmos, or, you know, the universe. For marginalized groups, traditional memory work can serve as a warning of bad things, you know, repeating the past, or a location of harmful things. There's also the erasure of memory work, attempts to erase bad events. You know, there are differences between institutional memory, for example, in my context, how students see things versus how university administration might see things. And then there's also the community and the individual memory. You know, we have a place for all of these types of memory alongside each other to get a fuller narrative. The official record can document one thing, while the subjects or community can document or say another thing. And again, memory is important in some instances for survival. There's also land memory, if we're talking about people who work the land or people who are attached to the land, like, you know, Native Americans. And then also too, I thought about something in conversation with my mother, and as she ages, I become her memory. So, and I had that even before this particular question was presented to me, that, you know, oftentimes we serve as the memory for the elders in our lives. Oh, and then another thing, interesting thing, the term rememory that Toni Morrison created, which is things that are forgotten or repressed, but that are recalled. So, you know, there can be joy associated with memory, but then there's also lots of pain associated with collective memory, particularly with marginalized groups. And my question, you know, the question that occurred to me is, how do we make memory anew with unique approaches to archiving? So that's my question right now. I don't think there's a cut and dried answer to that. So, and, you know, in these ways, not necessarily in these ways that I find that we tend to fall back on, which have a lot to do with digital capitalism. But that's a larger conversation, how we sort of rely on digital ways of preserving our history, which are still not necessarily secure. Okay, and then another question, another great question that I don't often get to think about, that I had to really sit with, was why is legacy management important for Black communities? So this is a little bit of my personal history. First image is my great-grandmother, Bertha Minor. Second image is my great-grandfather, Marshall Wallace. Third image is of my parents at their wedding. And the last image is me in Mellow Yellow restaurant sometime in the late 70s in Hyde Park in Chicago. So as a Black community, of course, we are not a monolith. So capturing different experiences, identities in Black communities is reason enough. That is reason enough why legacy management is important. We can see how important archiving or legacy management is in the current social and political climate. control of the narrative about the last 15 to 20 years is going to be very important for younger people and for us. You know, how we progressed, the activism, some of the joy, the law enforcement interactions, incarceration, so on and so forth. Archiving and legacy management is a way that we tell stories and a way for us to have more control over collective stories. So it's kind of following up on what Raquel was talking about. Many of our stories were and still are embodied knowledge. So physical knowledge through dance, through oral histories, you know, through griot culture and dance. In Western print and material culture context, of course, we can't keep everything, but the act of identifying materials that we think would be useful for those in the future, no matter what community. So for example, communities of readers, communities of artists, neighborhoods, activists, students, is very important. That said, questions arise about the unique ways that we can keep, build, and then protect relevant Black collections. So the paper that, one of the papers that I just wrote, looking at doing a biographical analysis of the former chief of the Schomburg in New York City, Jean Hudson, one of the things that she pointed out with the importance of maintaining, preserving, taking care of, stewarding Black collections is that, you know, the archiving of Blackness is important because archives contain the knowledge to inform our action, to inform our activism. So there are a variety of reasons why archiving for Black communities is important. Sometimes survival, sometimes for joy, and sometimes for action. There we go.
Thank you so much, Kellee, for those
Thank you.
thorough and really well thought out answers. I appreciate everything you shared and everything Stacie and Raquel shared today. I think these are all questions that, even if we think about them individually, require a lot of processing and thought. And so it's exciting to hear from your perspectives as folks who have been in the field and have experience what these questions mean to you. I'm going to turn the floor over now to our guests. And if anybody has any questions, like I said before, you can feel free to put them in the chat and I'll read them out loud. Or if you want to speak directly, I know some of the panelists said they like the conversation style, so you can feel free to raise your hand and unmute. I can ask you to unmute yourself. But we have a whole 15 minutes for questions, which is really exciting. And if no one has a question right away, then I have a question I can start with.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, sweet. So I guess right now I know T, hi T. I'm an intern. I work in the Archives and Special Collections at Amherst in Massachusetts. And I'm like not pursuing a master's yet, but you know, I'm about to sort of step into the field officially. And I guess I should just say that I really appreciate your like testimony and like talking about, you know, your current positions and your institutions and like, you know, what it is that you do and also your relationship to this work. I guess my question is like, is there something in particular, or, you know, generally that you wish you had more room to do in your current position or in your current institution? I'm kind of like bucking up against that now at Amherst, so I'm really curious.
And Stacie, Raquel, and Kellee, any of you can feel free to go ahead and answer whenever you're feeling.
I'm I'm going to say based on the job description as written, no, I'm doing exactly what needs to happen, no more, and not necessarily less. It is exactly scoped to like what was expected. You know, in terms of areas, you know, to explore more about or something. I mean, there are maybe personal areas that I find very interesting, or that I'd be interested in exploring more of. But by and large, I think that's really just looking at like partnerships. There are different partnerships that I have not explored with people before through this work, or that we as this institution have not necessarily been able to explore through this work. So really those are the things that interest me, but I think that the actual areas of practice, yes, the plate is full. we're getting all the things. There's tech, there's archives, there's facilities. I clearly should have taken a class in engineering in my library science program, because that's real right now. All the facilities things. Yeah, but that part also is really, I think, energizing. I enjoy very much thinking through like big infrastructure questions and then like making long-term plans. It's fun.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. And I can also like type it in the chat too, so it's like everyone can see it. Something that you wish you had more room to do in your current position or institution that maybe you're being disallowed from doing, or, you know, don't have the time or current energy, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo some of the thoughts that Stacie expressed. Like, I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to, like, doing exactly what I'm supposed to do. And while there's many things that I would like to do and see done, it's not necessarily a matter of disallowing, you know, not being able to do it or being prevented from doing it. It's just, you know, a city government and funds often dictate what you can and cannot do in terms of like, you know, staffing and that sort of thing. But I'm also very fortunate. I'm also coming from a very different perspective in the sense that I'm new to the position. It will be 7 months in actually on this Friday. And for the prior to that, I served as the University Archivist and Director of Archives, Special Collections and Records Management at Chicago State University. But after Kellee, I wasn't there during the time that Kellee did her internship. And so coming from that perspective, I had a very small staff. And so there was always things to do and many things got done. But it still was never enough because just didn't have the staffing and the funds to do so. So I feel very fortunate in this position that there is a staff, you know, that we can, you know, that I can delegate tasks to and start to work slowly towards some of those larger, you know, plans and initiatives that I would like to see get off the ground. And in fact, someone just sent a direct message to me about inquiring about the collection makeup in terms of if it includes West Side narratives as well, or is it just South Side narratives? Because, you know, as we may know that, you know, most of Black Chicago history is told through, you know, the narratives of the South Side, like many folks who were engaged with organizations and lived on the South Side. But it does have West Side narratives. But I share with them as a native West Sider, I am very intentional about seeing that narrative grow because it's not in large measure. And so that is something that I would like to see happening, but I'm just getting to the organization. So I just need some time to do it. But and there's many things I've already identified. I'm like, if I had $1 million, you know, like if I just had money to spend, you know, I would do all the things. So I do have that list already, you know, just to kind of, again, to continue to elevate the narratives here and, you know, see it not only, you know, this collection, people know the collection and, you know, there's been a lot of great scholarly work that has come out of the collection, but I have plans and goals for to have even further reach, national and international reach. So yeah, that's my answer to that.
And I think it's Asa, right? I think so. I have plenty to do. I'm not looking for for anything else to do. In fact, I feel like with all of the responsibilities that I do have currently, sometimes I find that I can't really complete those in the manner that I would like to. But I would say if there was anything, I would really like to focus on building up the instruction program for the special collections library. I haven't had the staff, as Raquel referred to. I think in academic special collections librarians, libraries, they really, they're quite understaffed. And I actually did a survey across the nation of academic special collections libraries, and that is the main issue, the understaffing. So yes, I have plenty to do, and I'm probably doing some things that I should not be doing that another professional should be doing. But yes, instruction program would be ideal. We started working on that when I was first hired. And then my supervisor at the time, she left her position. So that kind of destabilized things a little bit. So I would love to get back to that.
Thank you, all three of you, for those thorough answers. And thank you, Asa, for that question. I think it's an interesting one to think about at different points in your career as well, and with the different circumstances that you end up in different roles, like you all talked about. Does anybody else have any other questions? Like I said, you can raise your hand and I can ask you to unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat. We have about 5 minutes left, so maybe 1 or 2 questions.
I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you all again for sharing. I'm really curious, as you've approached your work over the last 2 years, have you had to protect your sense of self in your environment, as well as like with the specific work that you're doing? And if so, what did that look like both personally and professionally? I'm really interested in like ways maybe community building happened alongside of your work, or if you needed to step back from any specific archival projects in the process.
That's an interesting question. And just to make sure I have the first part that you said again, you were asking what types of things folks might have to step back from. Was that?
Yeah, both like stepping back from, or I guess this is more like a trauma-informed question. I know like with the pandemic and the things happening in Chicago specifically over the last couple of years, I've been hearing different stories of how folks in the library have been coping. And so I'm just really curious if that applied to your specific work or not. Maybe you didn't experience anything, but if you did, how you navigated that both personally and professionally.
So great question. I'll answer that briefly and simply say I started at this organization in the middle of the pandemic, and like at a time when the climate I think was still really it was very tense. So I mean, it would be hard to come into any organization at any time where like by and large most of the people there have worked there a really long time. It's always challenging to come into an org like that, where folks kind of have been there for a minute and you are very new. Doing that in the middle of the pandemic, yeah, felt even more wild. So what I will say was, having been in several different institutions where quite honestly things were not necessarily safe for me as a Black woman, I think it just seemed like when I got here, the most important thing to work on was culture, like sort of figuring out what culture existed. And then as we're working to build the culture of the unit and have like a shared and collaborative culture, working to very actively and intentionally mitigate or cease behaviors or activities or cultures that did not lend themselves to that type of collaborative activity, really, and try, just trying to work on setting a base level culture foundation of respect for folks in the workplace. Like, I feel like all this other stuff everybody talks about, you literally can't get it done if you're in a shop where people are having issues like respecting each other, communicating with each other, having challenges, working with each other, communicating across differences. You cannot do any of those things. So I'll say the trauma-informed approach was to simply have a deeper focus on what I understood about the culture, and work in collaboration with folks to try to shift that in ways that were like positive and equitable. And that's ongoing work. That's like, yeah.
Yeah, so again, I'm new to the organization, and fortunately, I feel this is for me, and not just because my supervisor is on the on the line. I don't know if people piece that together that Stacy and I work together. But I feel very fortunate to be here. But I have worked in other organizations where I did have to really protect my peace and protect my sense of self, even in predominantly, Black institutions, and I have had, I have had times where, and it wasn't necessarily, I've had different instances in this work where it wasn't, necessarily somebody who was in a position of authority, who may have caused harm, but it was, others that are colleagues, same level, or even if the reporting structure was for those individuals to report to me, that I would be in a supervisory position. And I have had those moments where I had to unfortunately take like measures to contact HR to find out, okay, what is my means of mitigating this problem. So I've had to do that, but I also am a person that I can be very upfront, not in a harsh or aggressive way, but just I can be direct, like, okay, what's the problem? Let's resolve it. And if I can't resolve it with you, then then move over. We got to keep going. So learning, just kind of, you do have to learn the culture, learning, and also understanding you're not going to be able to, you're not going to always, there's always going to be someone you may not get along with or anything like that, but the work does need to be done, and finding some type of common ground so the work can get done, because as Stacy said, you can't do the work if you're depending on other people, and for whatever reason, personality issues or what have you, and whatever that may be, unfortunately, I have had those instances where, I had to question, was race an issue, but if you can't get past those things, it's hard to get the work done. And I have had that instance where there was, a difficult, cantankerous, employee, that it actually stifled a project. It completely halted it for about 2 years. And so, so when you see those things, and seeing that it's impacting the work and impeding the work, know your options. Don't, of course, if, do what you feel that's comfortable and you feel safe for yourself, find your allies, and, and hopefully that's something that can be worked out within your space, within your unit or what have you. But, feel free to feel empowered to step away if you have to, and do it in a way that, that again, it feels safe for you, and know that you have options within your organization to be protected. And even thinking about the pandemic, I did have to, there was moments where it was, work got done remotely, but I realized working remotely means you can do a lot more work. It's easier to do a lot more work remotely. And so I had to be intentional about, not one more Zoom meeting. Like, I'm sorry, I cannot take that Zoom meeting, or can we push this back so I don't have, 7 Zoom meetings in a day, so just, find ways to, to empower yourself. And, if the modes of doing the work, if you have a laptop or something, like I did intentional things, like let me go on outside in the garden or, on a bench or something to do the work, I found those things for myself to keep myself balanced and, but yeah, and stepped away if I had to take a break, of course, and also responsibly let my, supervisor know, like, hey, I need to take a pause on this one project because it's a bit much, because of whether the nature of the project, content, subject matter, or maybe just kind of the context in which the project was being facilitated. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I know we're a little bit over time, but Kellee, if you have a couple minutes, I would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Okay, I will try to get through this quickly as I possibly can. I think I already talked to Rebecca about this in another group of BMRC people. So it's good to see you, Rebecca. Thank you for your question. I think as a person who manages public services and a Black woman, to be clear, I was very frustrated with how the institution treated the people that were in public facing roles. So I have to be honest with that. But I was also in a position to sort of, mitigate any harm. I was also supervising people. So I had to think about those people as well. And I tried to protect them as much as I could by keeping them at home. If I was here, they were at home doing online reference at home. And then probably after the first year, I had the grad student that I've been working with for the past 2 years come into the library to page materials. So then we started to sort of work on a rotation. But I was very disappointed. None of these places are going to protect you. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And if you have a front-facing position, it's quite different if you're an archivist, like the former manuscripts librarian. She was able to accomplish a lot of work at home because she was just mainly working with metadata and working with our content management system and sort of updating finding aids. She was able to do that kind of work from at home. But when you have to assist researchers, maybe assist people that are in the university, your colleagues in the university, then you kind of have to be on site with special collections because you have to have access to the materials in order to respond to questions. So that was my main challenge. But I think I managed it pretty well, and I'm still, we're still in the midst of, whatever stage this is in the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm still managing it in that particular way, even though sort of the university itself has even, a lot of these universities have stripped away some of the layers of protection that we did have at the start of the pandemic.
Thank you again for those really thorough answers. I can see in the chat, everybody's appreciating it. I know we had one last question. Thank you, Stacie, for answering it in the chat when you got a chance. We are over time, so I'm going to close things out. The last thing I have to say is that I'm putting a link to a feedback form in the chat. If folks could please fill that out, it'll only take a couple minutes and really does wonders for us to be able to host more programming like this and better programming. So thank you so much, Kellee, Stacie, and Raquel, for sharing your thoughts and taking the time to be with us today. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your week.